Okay, in this third video, we're going to go on to the next phase and actually use what we've already set up in the prior two videos. So what we're going to do in this video is actually deploy some tenants and some schemas through Multisite Orchestrator. Just a little bit of setup. In the prior two videos, I showed you how to deploy the MSO cluster. And in the second video, I showed you how to set up the ISN interconnectivity between the sites in my example. All of that stuff is already done. So now what we need to do in this video is inside MSO, we need to do a couple of things here. And the first is add some tenants through MSO that will get deployed. Create at least one schema, and a schema is how you actually devise policy and configuration in MSO. And then inside the schema, we have the ability to create what are called templates, and we're going to create a couple of those templates to deploy either at both sites or only one or the other kind of site. It's important to note that when we deploy multi-site with ACI, we have a couple of options on a per bridge domain behavior. So the first option that I want to show is what we call layer 3 only across sites. And if you look at this picture here, what we've chosen to do in this design is in site 1 we have network red, and in site 2 we have network green. They're completely different networks. They belong to the same tenant, they belong to the same shared VRF, but they're different networks. And all we want to do with multi-site across the ISN is just do standard layer 3 only routing. So no bum traffic, no broadcast, nothing like that at all. The second option we want to do is what's called IP mobility with bum flooding. So broadcast, unknown unicast, and multicast. And in this particular design choice, we'll create a different bridge domain. And you can see in this picture, we have network blue that will actually exist and be stretched across both sites. But what we don't want is we don't want to stretch the bum traffic. We only just want to stretch the network. One of the nice recent enhancements to multi-site is the fact that we can do this kind of stretching of networks across sites without bum traffic, but still have the advantage of VM migration, so vMotion or live migration or whatever you have. And that is supported as of ACI Release 3.2. Now the third option we have here is to completely stretch full layer 2 across sites. So as you see here, we have network blue. It is stretched across both sites, but we actually do want to flood bum traffic across both of those sites. Let's say you have an application that has a layer 2 clustering kind of technology behind it or whatnot. And the only difference between 2 and 3 is the fact that we're going to click a couple more boxes in MSO to make that happen. I want to be absolutely clear that you don't have to pick only one of these choices. You can pick all three of them or a mix and match of any one of them because, as I said earlier, it's on a per bridge domain basis. So in your environment, you have many bridge domains, and each of those bridge domains will choose one of these options. So with that being said, let's actually go build it in MSO and make sure that it's working. Okay, so here we are logged back into MSO, and the first thing that I want to do is create a tenant, and I want that tenant to actually exist in both sites. So under the left-hand menu bar, click on Tenants, and you can see I don't have anything here but Tenant Common, which comes with ACI out of the box. So I'll click Add Tenant, and I'll give it a name, and I'll give it a description, and then I will choose which particular sites I would like this tenant to be in, and as I said, I want it to be in both Site 1 and Site 2, so I'll select those and then say Save. Now if I go into APIC, you can actually see the tenants have already shown up in each of my APICs that are managing the particular sites. Now the next thing that I want to do is I want to create what's called a schema. So back in the left-hand menu bar, I'll click on the item called schemas, and you can see I don't have any, so let's go ahead and add my first one. So here we want to probably give the schema a better name than untitled schema, so I'll just give it a very simple name, but something that maybe makes sense to my environment. You can see here underneath schema we have this concept of templates, and it gives you a placeholder for something called template 1. And again, I think I want to modify the name to something that makes more sense, so I'm going to call this one shared. And with this particular template, what I will use it for is to create objects that will exist in both sites shared together. Later on, I'm going to create some other templates here that say only these objects should live in site 1 and only these other objects should live in site 2. Okay, let's get started with the resources under shared. So these are things that will live in both sites. So the first thing we need to do is we need to select a tenant. This is why in the step before we had to create that mSite tenant so that we can select it here. So I'll go ahead and do that here. In fact, it's the only tenant we have. Okay, now there's a couple of things we need to think about here. What exactly do we want to exist equally in both sites? And so in my particular case, I'm going to choose to have an application profile exist in both sites, although that's not absolutely required. They can be different. I'm going to just stretch one. But more importantly, I think I want to have them all in the same VRF. So the VRF will exist in both sites, and I'll connect my different endpoints on different networks to that same VRF. And you know what? I think I'm going to need a contract and a filter, so I might as well have that contract and filter shared in both sites so I can make one provider, one consumer, and traffic will pass. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and make our application profile. So we'll click on here, we'll give it a name, and I'll just call this something like shared ANP. That's all I need to do there. I think the next thing we should probably do is create a VRF. So under VRF, I'll click plus, and I'll call this VRF1. Nothing more to do there. And then standard filter and contract, which I'll quickly create. So a filter, and I'll just say allow all, and I will make an entry that effectively allows all. So basically layer 2 and on up. I want to keep it simple for you. You could get as sophisticated as you want with contracts. And let me add the contract as well, and we will call this shared contract. And scope is VRF, that's fine. And then we'll go ahead and add the filter that we just created called allow all, and say save. Now at this point, I've created the template here, but I haven't yet deployed it. So the first thing I'll do is I'll click save, just to make sure we've got that done. Now the thing is, all this is a template. I need to tell the template which sites it should get deployed to. So if you click on the sites button underneath, you see you get a list of all your available sites. I want to click both and say save. And at this point, the deploy to sites button lights up, and I'll go ahead and click that, and it will actually deploy to both sites. You can see here that it gives you a nice little grid to say, look, these are the objects that we've created, and these are the sites that they're going to be pushed through. And in this case, everything's being pushed. So I'll click deploy. And that's what we want to see, is successfully deployed. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to create another template. And this is a template that will only exist in site 1. So we'll click on the plus button, and you'll see we have a template here. Let's just call this site 1 only. We'll give it a name. We need to, again, select the tenant we want to work with, and we will, of course, select our tenant multi-site. Now, at this point, the template doesn't know much about there, so we have to import some things. So I'm going to import from site 1 with Multipod, and I get a list of things I want to import. I think in this case, I'm just going to bring in the shared ANP so that I can create an endpoint group underneath it. And so I'll say import, and you can see here, I've got my AP shared ANP ready to go. And the first thing I'm going to do is I think what I'll do is I'll make my bridge domain first. So this bridge domain will be a network that only lives in site 1. And then in site number 2, I'll make a completely new and separate bridge domain with an entirely different network on the same VRF, and we'll connect them together. So on bridge domain, let's go ahead and call this BD1. We need to select which VRF. In this case, as I mentioned earlier, VRF1 is stretched across both sites. They're sharing the same VRF. What I'm going to do is untick this layer 2 stretch box, which basically unticks everything. Because if you recall in this example, I only want a layer 3 route between sites. I don't want any layer 2 connectivity or any kind of bum traffic. Complete layer 3 separation is what I'm after here. Okay, the next thing I need to do under the ANP is to create an EPG. So I will call this EPG1. I will attach it to the bridge domain 1 that I just created. And let's go ahead and attach the contract that I built in just a few seconds ago here. So if you click here, you can see there is my shared contract. And I'm going to make this guy, let's say, the provider. Okay, there is one more step that we need to do here. So if you notice here under the site called Site 1 with Multipod, there's my Site 1 only template. I'm going to click on that. because what you probably are wondering is, where did he set the bridge domain network? And when you have an object or a resource that exists in only one site, you have to go into the site attached template here and then add the final touch. It's a little bit confusing at first, but once you do it a few times, it becomes pretty second nature. So I am under site one with Multipod, the site one only template. I'm going to click on the bridge domain, and this is where I add my subnet. So in this bridge domain, I'll make it a simple 1.1/24, and I'll call this, I don't know, site one network, just for description. Everything else is fine. I'll click save. The next thing we need to do as well is I'm going to connect some virtual machines. And I have already created virtual machine manager domains in my Apex. They already exist. So integration with vCenter in this case. So I need to attach that VMM domain here to EPG1. So I'll click there. And if you notice under domains, I have a new selection here, and I will select the appropriate domain association type profile. I've already pre-built this ahead of time in Apex. This is not something that I build in MSO. I'll just make it immediate and immediate. Everything else can be the same, and I'll click save. Okay, so at this point, I believe we have everything we need for site one. I am going to do exactly the same thing for site two, with the only difference being the bridge domain will have a different network, and I'll attach the contract as consumer. I'm not going to show that in the video because it will take time, but it's exactly the same steps that I've done for site one only. Okay, I went ahead, paused the video, and I created a template for site two. Let's just quickly look it over so that we're very clear on what we have. So here's my new template that exists in site two only. I created a whole new EPG number 2. I also created a whole new bridge domain number 2. Again, it's in the shared VRF, but it's an entirely different bridge domain. I unticked the layer 2 stretch. So all of that is exactly the same. If I click into the template attached to site 2, again, we can see under the bridge domain, I've added a new network, a second network, 192.168.2.1, so that's different from bridge domain number 1 that lives in site 1. And then under EPG, I've attached a pre-existing VMM domain that only exists in site 2. I just want to point out that these are, it's one vCenter managing both sites, so I've created 2 different DVSs. One lives in site 1, one lives in site 2, and VC site 2 is the domain that only lives in site 2. And then finally, I attached the shared contract in this particular case as a consumer. Now, at this point, I am actually ready to deploy to sites. So let's go ahead and click the Deploy to Sites button. And again, we get our grid. And successfully deployed, that's exactly what we want to see. I did forget to do one thing. I only deployed the Site 2 template. If you notice here under the Site 1 only template, there's a little icon that says, hey, maybe you should check something here. And what it's saying is you haven't yet deployed. So it's as simple as clicking Deploy to Sites, and I'm done. Okay, what I've done in the background is I've gone ahead and I've attached 2 virtual machine endpoints, one living in Site 1, one living in Site 2, to their respective DVSs that are mapped to all of the ANPs and EPGs that I've just created in MSO. So what we see here is the endpoint that lives only in Site 1 on network 1, EPG1, bridge domain 1. Its address is 1.11. And what we see here is this is the endpoint that only lives in Site 2 under bridge domain 2, EPG2. And you can see its network is different. In this case, it is 2.5. So let's go ahead and test if we can actually ping each other. And if we can, we know it absolutely is working at layer 3. And if we ping, we can see here. So we know that networking is working. We also know that the contract is working as well. We had consumer and provider, and everything is like we want it. Just to prove that bum traffic isn't working, I have this really simple multicast, layer 2 multicast app. So I'm going to go ahead and make this guy the server. So he's going to send layer 2 multicast packets out there. And I'll make this guy the receiver, the client. And if I click here, you can see, look, no multicast traffic, no multicast traffic. Like I said, this is layer 2 multicast traffic, which proves that we are not stretching bum traffic across. In the other examples that I'll show you next, we'll rerun this test where we actually stretch bum, and we'll see that multicast traffic at layer 2 will actually work. Before I show the final two networking examples here, I just want to take a quick peek at what does APIC look like in each of the sites. So here we have site 1, and as you can see, there's our shared ANP, there's our VRF, our bridge domains, and our EPGs. Now you will note a couple of things here. Anything managed by MSO has this extra little black cloud object. As we know, that's managed by MSO. So it's basically saying don't make changes in APIC to this object, do it through MSO from this point forward. The next thing you'll notice is, hey, listen, both EPGs, both bridge domains have been deployed in this site. And if we look at site 2, this is site 2, the exact same thing has happened. Why is that? So what's happening here is both APICs need to be aware of all these objects, but when we need to communicate across these sites, MSO handles some of the translation between, what is the VNID for this bridge domain and VRF in site 1, and what is the comparable VNID and bridge domain VRF information in site 2. They will be different, but MSO understands how they map together, and so that's why you'll see both objects from both sites show up in both, but it's not a big deal. You'll manage all of this stuff from this point on in MSO. Okay, for the next part of the video, we're going to go very quickly because I'm going to show you both example number 2, IP mobility without bum flooding, and I'm going to then quickly tick a box and show you option 3, where we actually do have full layer 2 adjacency and flood bum across both sites. So I'm going to very quickly show you what I've done in MSO to make this happen. Okay, here we are in MSO, and what you didn't see was I undeployed all of the templates and stuff from my first example, which was layer 3 only. So I'm kind of starting more or less with a clean slate. So you won't see site 1 only, site 2 only. In this particular example, I have one VRF, I have one bridge domain, one network, and one EPG that is going to be existing equally in both sites, right? So I'm stretching all of that stuff across. The important distinction here is I'm not allowing the flooding of bum traffic. I've already built that stuff in the template, but let's quickly look at the template here so we understand what we have. So here's my shared template. You can see it's totally different. I've made changes from the example before, so don't get confused. Same VRF1. I've created a new bridge domain, a stretched bridge domain. And notice here, this is where I attach the gateway, because this bridge domain will have the same network and same gateway in both sites, right? So this is a little bit different from when you have resources existing only in one site or the other. So just be aware. So that's the bridge domain there. Attached to the VRF, I've created an EPG called L2 sans bum, so no bum traffic. And notice I've attached it to the new stretch BD. I should probably go back to the bridge domain. Notice here I have the layer 2 stretched checkbox enabled, but not intersite bum traffic allowed. So I've actually ticked this one and left this one unticked, right? So we're all clear. The last thing I had to do was I had to go into each site and map the unique VMM domain that exists only in that one site. So you can see here, I have mapped my DVS that lives only in site 1 here. And in site 2, I've done the same thing with the second VMM domain called VC_site2. And at this point, I'm actually ready to deploy to sites. So once again, we get our grid. These are all the things that will get pushed to both sites and successfully deployed. Okay, and let's test. So I just want to show you this is the exact same 2 endpoints with a couple of minor changes to be aware of. This is the endpoint as we remember existing only in site 1. It is attached to the only network I have going on, 192.168.1.x. If I look over at the second host, this host lives only in site 2, but notice a small change. It is on the same network. I've changed its address, so these two guys are on the same bridge domain. They're in the same EPG, so I don't need any contracts, and of course they're all using the same VRF. So if I go ahead and test, if I go ahead and ping, here we'll see that traffic is in fact working. I'll ping from the other side as well, and oop, that's the wrong address. It should be 1.5, and 1.5 is in fact working. If we go back to our multicast, again, we should expect not to see multicast traffic because, again, we are verifying that we are not flooding bum traffic in this particular instance. And so this is exactly what we want to see. Now, that was option number 2 for stretching a network across 2 sites, same BD, same VRF, same EPG. Now, in the last example that I want to show you, I actually want to show you option 3, where we actually will flood bum traffic across sites. And there's a very minor change we need to make here in MSO and push it for that to happen. So if we go back into our shared template, we go back into the stretched BD that we have, and if we tick that box right there, intersite bum traffic, and also optimize WAN bandwidth, we're going to go ahead and make that happen. So I've got the template updated, and what I'll have to do is now deploy to sites. And it looks like both of them successfully got deployed. So if we go back, we should actually see layer 2 multicast traffic working, which will verify that bum traffic is in fact as we want it, flooding across both sites. Okay, so this is my multicast sender and it's sending traffic. And if we look over here, here is my multicast receiver, and we can actually see here that we are now receiving layer 2 multicast traffic in this example, and everything is working as we expected. So this video got a little long, but we've actually reached the end. So you've seen now how to deploy MSO, how to build your schemas, and how to deploy the different networking options on a per bridge domain basis based on your particular needs. I hope you find this video or this series of video useful, and I will say goodbye now and thank you.